"Stop, I'll buy her," he shouted. "Call her fat pig, I just fell in love with her." On a dusty frontier street, a drunken rancher drags his own daughter onto the wagon platform. The crowd laughs, jeering at her weight, ready to watch her sold like cattle. But then boots strike the dirt, and a rugged mountain man steps forward, his silver dollar flashing in the sunday. What begins as a shocking rescue sets fire to the whole town. Whispers spread, fists tighten, and the saloon owner claims the girl belongs to him bound by a crooked debt. Chains rattle, the church bell tolls. A woman mocked all her life must now face down the law, the saloon, and her own fears of never being worthy. But as secret surface ledgers forged, debts twisted, hearts begin to change. Will one man's bold stand, and one woman's hidden strength, be enough to break the grip of cruelty? Or will the frontier swallow them whole before love can triumph? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The crowd's whispers buzzed like angry hornets as Jaden Harper guided Madeline May away from the wooden platform. His weathered coat hung loose around her shoulders, still warm from his body heat. Madeline clutched the rough wool closer, trying to disappear inside its folds. Her legs trembled with each step. "Easy now," Jaden murmured, his voice low and steady. "You're safe." His calloused hand rested lightly on her elbow, steering her through the sea of staring faces. Behind them, her father's drunken curses mixed with scattered laughter from the saloon crowd. The sound made Madeline flinch. Jaden's jaw tightened, but he kept walking, his boots kicking up little clouds of dust from the packed dirt street. "Reckon we ought to get you somewhere quiet," he said. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the main street of Pine Ridge, painting the wooden buildings in shades of amber and gold. A cool mountain breeze rustled through the aspen trees at the edge of town, carrying the sharp scent of pine. Madeline nodded mutely, still too stunned to speak. Her cheeks burned with shame, remembering her father's cruel words. "Fat pig." The insult echoed in her mind, familiar as her own heartbeat. But then she heard Jaden's voice again, fierce and clear. "I just fell in love with her." Nobody had ever spoken up for her like that before. They reached the end of the street where Jaden's wagon waited. The wooden boards weathered silver gray with age. Two steady mules stood in the traces, their ears flicking back and forth. Jaden helped Madeline onto the high seat with gentle hands. "Miss May," he said formally. "I know we ain't properly introduced. I'm Jaden Harper. I run a small spread up Lightning Creek way." He cleared his throat. "I meant what I said back there. Every word." Madeline finally found her voice, though it came out barely above a whisper. "Why would you do that for me? You don't even know me." Jaden's eyes were the color of summer sky, clear and honest. "Because what they did wasn't right. Treating any soul that way ain't Christian." He paused, studying her face. "And because I've watched you these past market days, seen how kind you are to them kids at the general store, even when their mamas whisper behind their hands about you. Seen how you help old widow Jenkins with her marketing when her arthritis is bad." Fresh tears welled in Madeline's eyes. She hadn't known anyone notice such things. "You didn't deserve what happened today," Jaden continued. His voice grew rough with emotion. "And I couldn't stand by and watch it." The sound of boots on packed earth made them both turn. The saloon keeper, Mr. Calloway, sauntered toward them, his fancy vest stretched tight across his belly. A false smile played on his thin lips. "Now, Harper," he called out. "Don't be hasty. Old Joe May was just having some fun. He owes me money, you see. Lot of money." His eyes gleamed with cruel amusement. "That girl's more trouble than she's worth. Eats enough for 3 men, so I hear." Jaden's shoulders stiffened. He stepped between Calloway and the wagon, his stance protective. "That debt ain't her burden to bear, and I won't hear another word against her." "No?" Calloway's smile widened, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "Well, ain't you the gallant knight? But tell me, what woman's going to want a widowed mountain man who lives in a line shack? Especially one who couldn't even save his first wife?" The words struck like physical blows. Jaden's face went pale beneath his tan, but his voice remained steady. "You're testing my Christian charity, Calloway. I suggest you walk away now." The saloon keeper raised his hands in mock surrender, but his eyes were cold. "Just trying to save you some trouble. That girl's father owes me $500. Might be safer for everyone if you reconsidered your purchase. The only trouble here is you, Jaden said quietly. Now get. Calloway's smile vanished. You'll regret this, Harper. Both of you will. He turned on his heel and stalked back toward the saloon, where a crowd of rough men lounged on the porch, Madeline's hands twisted in her lap. He's right. I'm nothing but trouble. You should just let me go. No. Jaden's response was immediate and firm. He swung up onto the wagon seat beside her, gathering the reins. Unless you want to go. Do you have somewhere else to stay? She shook her head. Her father had gambled away their ranch months ago. They'd been living in a borrowed room behind the livery stable, but after today's display, she couldn't go back there. Then I'm offering you a home, Jaden said. It ain't much, just a line shack up the creek with a vegetable patch and some chickens, but it's clean and warm, and you'll be treated with respect. He paused, then added softly, I know what it's like to be alone. The mule's harness jingled as they shifted, eager to be moving. The sun had sunk lower, painting the western sky in streaks of pink and gold. Around them, the town's evening sounds rose, doors closing, children being called in for supper, the telegraph clicking in the railroad office. Madeline looked down at her worn dress, at the hands that had known hard work all her life. I can cook, she said hesitantly. And so, I'm good with a garden too. I don't need a housekeeper, Jaden said gently. I need. He stopped, choosing his words carefully. I reckon we both need someone to stand beside us, someone who understands what it means to hurt. His eyes met hers. Will you let me try to prove what I said? About loving you? The question hung in the air between them, fragile as spun sugar. Madeline thought about all the years of mockery, of shrinking herself small, of believing she deserved nothing better. Then she thought about how it felt when Jaden spoke up for her, wrapped his coat around her, looked at her like she mattered. Yes, she whispered. I'll try. A real smile transformed Jaden's weathered face, reaching all the way to his eyes. He clucked to the mules, and the wagon rolled forward, leaving the town behind. They passed the last buildings, the wheels crunching on the packed dirt of the mountain road. As they climbed higher into the gathering dusk, Madeline glanced back once at Pine Ridge. Lamplight gleamed in windows, and smoke rose straight up from chimneys in the still evening air. The saloon's gaudy front blazed with light, but it seemed smaller now, less threatening. Thinking about what you're leaving? Jaden asked quietly. Madeline shook her head. Thinking about what I might be finding. She pulled his coat tighter around her shoulders, breathing in the clean scent of pine and leather and honest work. For the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her heart. Hope. The mules plodded steadily onward as shadows lengthened across the valley. A pair of meadowlarks called their evening song, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote answered. The road wound higher into the mountains, carrying Madeline and Jaden toward whatever future God had in mind for two wounded souls brave enough to believe in love. The last rays of sunset caught Madeline's face, and Jaden glanced at her, seeing not the labels others had given her, but the strength that lay beneath. She'd need that strength in the days ahead. They both would. But for now, the important thing was that she wasn't alone anymore. Neither of them were. The wagon rolled on through the gathering dusk, its wheels turning steady and true on the mountain road. Behind them, the whispers and cruel laughter of Pine Ridge faded away, replaced by the peaceful sounds of the Colorado evening, wind in the pines, creek water over rocks, and the soft jingling of harness as the mules carried them home. Jaden guided Madeline away from the jeering crowd, with gentle but firm determination. His broad shoulders shielded her from the cruel stares and whispers that followed them down Pine Ridge's dusty main street. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as they made their way toward the livery stable where his mule waited. Easy now, he murmured, keeping his voice low and steady. You're safe. Ain't nobody going to hurt you anymore. His calloused hand hovered near her elbow, ready to steady her if she stumbled. Madeline trembled like an aspen leaf in autumn wind. The shame of what had just happened burned hot on her cheeks, and disbelief made her steps uncertain. Her father's drunken words still rang in her ears, mixing with the crowd's cruel laughter. She wrapped her arms around herself, clutching Jaden's coat closer. At the livery stable, a sturdy brown mule lifted its head and nickered softly at their approach. Jaden patted the animal's neck before turning to Madeline. This here's Moses. He's steady as they come. He adjusted the stirrups and gathered the reins, then turned to her. "Ma'am, I know you've had more than enough folks telling you what to do today, but I'm asking you proper. Please ride. It's a fair piece up to my place, and these mountain trails ain't kind of tired feet." Madeline stared at him, still struggling to understand his kindness. I'm too heavy, the poor creature. Moses here's packed timber and mining equipment up worse slopes than this. Jaden's voice was firm but gentle. He's strong and sure-footed. Now, may I help you up? When she nodded hesitantly, he made a stirrup of his hands. With surprising grace for such a big man, he helped her settle into the saddle. His movements were careful, respectful, nothing like the rough handling she'd endured earlier. They left town slowly, Jaden walking beside the mule. His stride was long and steady, and he kept one hand on Moses's bridle, guiding them along the winding mountain trail. The late summer air grew cooler as they climbed, carrying the scent of pine and sage. As they crested a ridge, the setting sun painted the western mountains in shades of purple and gold. The sight was so beautiful it nearly took Madeline's breath away. Below them, Pine Ridge looked small and far away, its buildings mere toys scattered in the valley. Why? Madeline finally found the courage to ask. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. "Why did you step in? Nobody else ever has." Jaden walked several paces before answering, his boots crunching on the rocky trail. When he spoke, his words were simple but carried the weight of absolute conviction. "Because you deserve better." The truth in his voice made her throat tight. She blinked back tears, focusing on the gentle sway of Moses's gait and the steady presence of the man beside her. The trail wound higher through stands of aspen and pine. Shadows lengthened across the valley as the sun sank lower. Finally, they rounded a bend, and Jaden's line shack came into view. It was a rough cabin tucked against a grove of tall pines, with a small corral and lean-to stable beside it. A thin curl of smoke rose from the stone chimney. He'd obviously banked the morning's fire before heading to town. "It ain't much," Jaden said, a touch of uncertainty in his voice. "But it's dry and warm, and there's plenty of good water from the creek." He helped her down from Moses with the same careful respect he'd shown earlier, then led the mule to the stable. Madeline stood uncertain, watching as he removed the saddle and bridle, gave Moses a measure of grain, and made sure the animal was comfortable for the night. When he returned, he pulled a key from his pocket and unlocked the cabin door. "Please," he said, gesturing for her to enter. The interior was dim but neat. A stone fireplace took up most of one wall, with a cooking shelf built into its side. A narrow bed stood in one corner, covered with a faded but clean quilt. A rough-hewn table with 2 chairs occupied the center of the room, and shelves lined the walls, holding books, tools, and supplies. Jaden moved efficiently around the small space, stirring the banked coals and adding kindling until flames licked upward. He lit a brass lantern, its warm glow pushing back the gathering darkness. Then he measured coffee into a battered tin pot and set it on the cooking shelf. "Are you hungry?" he asked. "I've got beans and bacon, some biscuits from yesterday." Madeline shook her head. Her stomach was too knotted with emotion to even think about food. She stood awkwardly, still wearing his coat, unsure what to do or say. Jaden seemed to understand. He pulled out one of the chairs. "Sit, please. Rest a spell while the coffee brews." She sank into the chair, watching as he moved around the cabin. His size should have made him seem cramped in the small space, but he moved with the ease of long familiarity. When the coffee was ready, he poured 2 cups and set one before her. "The bed's yours," he said matter-of-factly. "I'll take some blankets by the fire." "Oh, no, I couldn't," Madeline protested. "You've already done so much. I can sleep on the floor." "No, ma'am, you won't." His voice was gentle but firm. "My mama raised me better than that." He paused, then added softly, "Please, let me do this right." Outside, a coyote's lonely call echoed through the gathering night. Another answered from further up the valley, their wild song drifting through the cabin's walls. The fire crackled, sending sparks up the chimney, and the coffee's rich aroma filled the small space. Exhaustion suddenly crashed over Madeline like a wave. The day's events, the horror and shame, followed by this stranger's unexpected kindness, had drained her completely. Her eyes grew heavy as she sat in the chair's rough comfort. Jaden must have noticed. He took the barely touched coffee cup from her hands. "Rest now. Things will look different in the morning light." Too tired to protest further, Madeline made her way to the narrow bed. She kept Jaden's coat wrapped around her like armor as she lay down. The quilt smelled of pine needles and wood smoke when she pulled it up. In the quiet darkness, she offered up a silent prayer, something she hadn't done since her mother died years ago. Was it possible this stranger truly meant what he'd said in town? Could anyone really look at her and see something worth loving? Across the cabin, Jaden settled onto his blankets near the hearth. The fire's glow outlined his broad shoulders as he sat watching the flames. His expression was thoughtful, determined. A man who knew he'd taken on a serious responsibility but was uncertain of the path ahead. The fire popped and settled. Another coyote called in the distance. Madeline's eyes grew heavier, and she found herself drifting, wrapped in the unfamiliar comfort of feeling safe. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Jaden adding another log to the fire, his movements careful and quiet. He sat back down, a steady guardian in the flickering light, as if he'd appointed himself protector of her peace. Dawn crept over the mountains, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. The rhythmic thunk of an axe splitting wood echoed through the crisp morning air as Jaden worked steadily behind his cabin. Each stroke was precise, methodical, Madeline sleeping helping him. The familiar routine helping him sort through his thoughts about the woman sleeping inside. Inside the cabin, Madeline stirred beneath the faded quilt. The rich aroma of coffee drifted through the small space, and morning light filtered through the single window. For a moment, she lay still, disoriented. Then memory rushed back, the horror of yesterday, followed by unexpected rescue. She sat up slowly, noticing that Jaden had already folded his blankets near the hearth. The fire had been built up fresh, and a pot of coffee sat warming on the cooking shelf. Outside, the steady sound of chopping continued. Madeline rose carefully, still wearing her dress from yesterday and Jaden's coat. She took a tentative step, then another, allowing herself to really look at the cabin for the first time. Everything was simple but neat. The rough-hewn table and chairs showed signs of careful repair. Shelves lined with provisions spoke of preparation for winter. A few books stood in a row, their spines well worn but treated with respect. Near the iron stove, she found a bag of flour and some other basic supplies. The familiar sight of cooking implements drew her. Perhaps if she could make breakfast, she could begin to repay some small part of his kindness. Her hands shook as she tried to measure flour into a bowl. The trembling grew worse until suddenly the bag slipped, sending a shower of white powder across the wooden floor. Madeline froze, her heart pounding. The chopping outside had stopped. The door opened, and Jaden stepped in, bringing with him the scent of fresh-cut wood and morning air. He took in the scene. In Diata, the spilled flour, Madeline's stricken expression, and moved forward slowly, as if approaching a frightened deer. "It's all right," he said softly. "Here, let me help." He steadied her hands with his own much larger ones, helping her set the flour bag on the table. His touch was gentle, careful. "I'm so sorry," Madeline whispered. "I've made such a mess." "No harm done." Jaden's voice remained calm and reassuring. "Flour sweeps up easy enough." He paused, then added with quiet conviction, "You belong here, Madeline. You don't need to earn your place." She blinked back tears at his words, unable to speak. Jaden retrieved a broom, and together, they cleaned up the spilled flour. Then he showed her where he kept the cooking implements, working beside her as they prepared a simple breakfast of biscuits and bacon. The domestic routine seemed to ease some of Madeline's tension. By the time they sat down to eat, a bit of color had returned to her cheeks. After breakfast, Jaden suggested they step outside. "There's some folks you should meet," he said with a slight smile. The morning air was cool and fresh, scented with pine. Jaden led her first to the stable where Moses, his mule, stood in the morning sunday. The animal's long ears twitched forward with interest. "This here's Moses," Jaden said, reaching up to scratch behind the mule's ears. Stubborn as they come, but the most reliable partner a man could ask for. To Madeline's surprise, the large animal seemed quite gentle, pushing his nose against Jaden's chest in search of treats. When Jaden encouraged her to pet Moses's neck, she did so hesitantly. The mule's coat was rough but warm beneath her fingers. Next, they visited a small chicken coop tucked against the side of the stable. Half a dozen hens pecked at scattered grain, clucking contentedly. "Not much of a flock," Jaden admitted, "but they keep me in eggs." A faint smile touched Madeline's lips as she watched the busy birds, the first real warmth Jaden had seen in her expression since yesterday. The sight made something twist in his chest. How long had it been since anyone had given her reason to smile? The peaceful moment shattered at the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Jaden straightened, moving instinctively to place himself between Madeline and the trail. Around the bend came a rider on a bay horse, the Sheriff Duncan, his badge glinting in the morning sunday. The sheriff reined in his horse, touching the brim of his hat in greeting, but his expression was grave. "Jaden, Miss May." He cleared his throat uncomfortably. "I'm afraid I've got some difficult news." Madeline's smile vanished. She drew closer to Jaden, clutching his coat tighter around her shoulders. The sheriff dismounted, his boots raising small clouds of dust. "There's been a situation. Seems last night, after the incident in town, your father went to the saloon, Miss May. Got to drinking and gambling." He paused, clearly reluctant to continue. "He signed some papers at the table, used you as collateral for his debts." "What?" Jaden's voice was dangerously quiet. "The saloon owner, he's claiming legal right to the lady. Sheriff Duncan wouldn't meet their eyes. Says she's his property now, to settle what's owed." "Property?" Jaden spat the word like poison. "She's a human being, not a sack of grain to be traded." "I understand how you feel, Jaden, but no." Jaden's hands clenched into fists. "No human being can be property. Those papers ain't worth the ink wasted on them." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "The law's complicated here. If you resist, he could press charges. You could face jail time." Beside Jaden, Madeline had gone pale as milk. "No," she whispered. "Oh no, please." Her legs seemed to give way, and she sank to her knees in the dust. Jaden knelt beside her immediately, one strong arm supporting her shoulders. "Look at me, Madeline. Look at me." He waited until she raised her tear-filled eyes to his. "You are not property. I don't care what paper says different. I won't let them take you. But you could. Go to jail." Her voice broke. "I've brought nothing but trouble to the only person who's shown me kindness. Ain't your fault." Jaden's voice was fierce with conviction. He looked up at the sheriff. "You tell that saloon owner he can take his claims to hell. She stays here." Sheriff Duncan sighed heavily. "I had to deliver the message. What comes next?" "Well, I reckon that's between you folks and your consciences." He mounted his horse and turned back toward town, leaving them alone in the morning sunshine. Silence fell heavy in his wake. Madeline's shoulders shook with silent sobs. Jaden kept his arm around her, his jaw set in determination. When she tried to pull away, he only held her more firmly. "I should go," she whispered. "I can't let you risk everything for me." Jaden turned her gently to face him. His weathered face was set with resolve as he took her trembling hand in his. "Listen to me, Madeline May. Yesterday in town I meant every word I said. You deserve better than being traded like cattle. I won't let you go. Not to that saloon owner. Not to anyone who'd treat you as less than the good woman you are." His grip on her hand was warm and steady, an anchor in the storm of her fear and grief. "But what can we do? We'll figure it out." Jaden's voice held absolute conviction. "Together, that's a promise." The morning sun climbed higher, warming the pine-scented air around them. In the chicken coop, a hen clucked softly. Moses watched them with his long ears pricked forward, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. Jaden helped Madeline to her feet, but he didn't let go of her hand. They stood together in the yard of his small homestead, two souls united against injustice, while the mountains looked down in silent witness to his vow. The next morning dawned clear and cold, frost sparkling on the pine needles. Jaden hitched Moses to the wagon while Madeline wrapped herself in his spare coat, her breath making small clouds in the crisp air. The mule's hooves clopped steadily as they started down the mountain trail toward Pine Ridge. "Reverend Alden's a good man," Jaden said, his voice carrying quiet assurance. "If anyone can help us sort this mess, it'll be him." Madeline nodded but remained silent, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. As they approached town, she seemed to shrink into herself, making her substantial frame appear smaller beneath the coat. Jaden noticed and clicked softly to Moses, slowing their already unhurried pace. The wagon rattled past the first buildings of Pine Ridge. Early morning workers and shopkeepers stopped to stare, some pointing and muttering behind raised hands. A group of men outside the general store fell silent as the wagon passed, their eyes following Madeline with undisguised curiosity. "Pay them no mind," Jaden murmured, though his jaw tightened at their scrutiny. They continued down the main street, Moses's steady gait carrying them past the saloon. The windows were dark, but Madeline shuddered and pressed closer to Jaden's side. He adjusted his grip on the reins, letting his arm brush against hers in silent support. The white-painted church sat at the far end of town, its simple steeple reaching toward the morning sky. Jaden helped Madeline down from the wagon, his strong hands steady at her waist. Together they climbed the wooden steps to the church door. Inside, the air smelled of beeswax and old hymnals. Reverend Alden was arranging flowers on the altar, but he turned at their entrance, his kind face creasing with concern. "Jaden Harper," he said warmly, coming forward to shake hands. "And this must be Miss May. Please, come into my study where we can talk privately." The preacher's study was a small room lined with books. Wooden chairs creaked as they settled in, sunlight streaming through a narrow window. Reverend Alden folded his hands on his desk and listened intently as Jaden explained the situation: the cruel auction, the gambling debt, the saloon, owner's claim. When Jaden finished, the Reverend was silent for a long moment. "First," he said finally, "let me be absolutely clear. No human being can legally be sold or traded as property. Those papers your father signed, Miss May, they have no true authority under God's law or man's." Madeline's shoulders relaxed slightly at his words, though worry still clouded her eyes. "However," the Reverend continued carefully, "we face a difficult situation. The saloon owner holds considerable influence in this town. He has the sheriff's ear, and many others depend on his goodwill for their business." "So what can we do?" Jaden asked, his voice tight with frustration. Reverend Alden leaned forward. "We pray for guidance and strength. We stand firm in what's right. And know that you're not alone in this fight. I'll speak to some of our church members, good people who won't stand for such injustice." He turned to Madeline, his eyes gentle. "The Lord sees your worth, my dear. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Tears welled in Madeline's eyes at his kindness. "Thank you, Reverend," she whispered. They left the study with the preacher's blessing and promise of support, but as they stepped out onto the church steps, cruel laughter cut through the morning air. A cluster of well-dressed women stood on the boardwalk across the street, whispering and pointing. Their words carried clearly in the still morning. "Can you imagine? Taking in that fat girl like some kind of charity case? Always knew Jaden Harper was odd, living up in those mountains alone, but this takes the cake." Or she took all the cake by the look of her. Fresh peals of laughter followed their cruel joke. Madeline's face flamed red, and she ducked her head, trying to make herself smaller despite her size. Jaden's hand found her elbow, steadying her as they walked to the wagon. "Their words show their own ugliness, not yours," he said quietly, helping her up onto the seat. The ride home was silent, both lost in their thoughts as Moses plodded steadily uphill. Late afternoon shadows were stretching across the yard when they finally reached the cabin. While Madeline started a stew for supper, Jaden brought in an armload of wood. He selected a smooth piece of pine and pulled out his pocket knife. "Come here," he called softly. "Let me show you something." Madeline approached hesitantly. Jaden pulled up a second chair beside him at the table. "Whittling's good for the soul," he said, demonstrating how to hold the knife safely. "Shows you how to find the beauty hidden in simple things." He guided her hands, teaching her how to let the blade follow the wood's grain. At first, her movements were uncertain, but gradually she found the rhythm of it. Small curls of pine shavings gathered on the table as they worked. "See how strong your hands are?" Jaden observed. "Just as capable of creating as mine." Madeline paused in her whittling, studying her work-reddened hands. "No one's ever said I was strong before," she admitted softly. "Then they weren't looking proper." Jaden's voice held absolute conviction. "Strength isn't just about muscle. It's about facing each day with courage, even when folks are cruel. It's about keeping your heart soft even when the world tries to harden it." A shy smile touched Madeline's lips, warming her entire face. She returned to her whittling with renewed confidence while the stew simmered on the stove, filling the cabin with savory aromas. They ate their supper in comfortable silence, sharing fresh bread and stew. Through the window, they could see the first snowflakes beginning to fall, dancing in the lamplight before settling softly on the ground. Madeline watched the snow, her expression thoughtful. The day's hurts were still there, but they seemed less sharp somehow, cushioned by Jaden's quiet strength and steady faith in her. Like the snow outside, something new and clean was slowly covering the painful past. The lamp cast a warm glow as they finished their meal, the soft sound of falling snow making the cabin feel like a sanctuary against the world's cruelty. Here, at least, Madeline knew she was seen for who she truly was, not for her size or her father's sins, but for her own worth as a child of God. Morning brought a blanket of white to the mountain. Snow continued to fall in lazy spirals, coating the pine branches and smoothing the rugged landscape into gentle curves. Inside the cabin, Madeline stirred the breakfast fire while Jaden pulled on his heavy coat. "Need to cut more timber," he said, adjusting his collar against the cold. "Won't you come help? Might do us both good to keep busy." Madeline hesitated, then nodded. She wrapped herself in the thick shawl Jaden had given her and followed him outside. The snow crunched beneath their boots as they made their way to the woodlot, Moses the mule plodding behind them with the hauling harness. In the shelter of the trees, the snow fell lighter. Jaden selected a fallen pine, its trunk already seasoned by summer Sunday. He handed Madeline the smaller of his two axes, showing her how to grip the handle. "Most folks swing wrong," he explained, demonstrating with his own axe. "They try to power through with just their arms, but the strength comes from here." He patted his shoulders. "Let the weight of the axe do the work. Your job is just to guide it." Madeline's first few swings went wild, the axe head barely biting into the wood, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. But Jaden's patience never wavered. "That's right," he encouraged. "Now try rocking your shoulders back, like this." He stood beside her, moving slowly through the motion. "Feel how your whole body moves together?" She nodded, adjusting her stance. The next swing landed truer, sending chips of pine flying. A small smile touched her lips. They worked steadily through the morning, the rhythm of their axes echoing through the snowy woods. Jaden kept a careful eye on her form, offering quiet suggestions when needed. By midday, Madeline's arms trembled with effort, but her determination never faltered. "Look here," Jaden said, pointing to a smaller log he'd set aside. "This one's ready for splitting. Want to try?" Madeline wiped her brow and positioned herself carefully. She took a deep breath, rocked back on her heels, and swung. The axe came down clean and true, and the log split with a satisfying crack. "I did it!" she exclaimed, her face glowing with triumph. Jaden's smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Knew you had it in you. Strong hands, remember?" They loaded the cut wood onto Moses's harness, the mule bearing the weight stoically. The walk back to the cabin was companionable, their breath clouding in the cold air. Inside, Madeline hung her shawl by the fire to dry and moved to the kitchen area. "I saw you had some venison stored," she said. "Would you mind if I made stew?" "Please do," Jaden replied, settling in to clean the axes. He watched with interest as she moved confidently around the small space, gathering ingredients. Her hands were sure as she cut vegetables and measured seasonings. Soon, rich aromas filled the cabin. "Smells mighty fine," Jaden commented as she stirred the pot. "Cooking's one thing I know well," she replied softly. "Even Father couldn't complain about my stews, usually." When the meal was ready, they sat at the rough-hewn table. Jaden took his first bite and his eyebrows rose in appreciation. "This is something special," he said. "Been a long while since I've had cooking like this." A comfortable silence fell between them as they ate. Finally, Jaden set down his spoon, his expression growing distant. "Had a wife once," he said quietly. "Sarah was her name. She loved to cook too." Madeline stilled, sensing the weight of his words. "Lost her in childbirth. 4 years back," he continued. "The baby too. Doctor was 3 days' ride away when her time came early." His hands tightened around his cup. "After, well, the loneliness like to swallowed me whole. Couldn't bear to be around folks, their pity. Moved up here, thought I'd live out my days alone." "I'm so sorry, Jaden." He covered her hand with his own, rough calluses gentle against her skin. "Thank you. It helps, sharing it." The moment was broken by the sudden thunder of hooves outside. Jaden was on his feet instantly, reaching for the shotgun mounted above the door. Madeline's face went pale. "Stay back from the windows," he ordered quietly, moving to peer through a gap in the curtains. Two riders sat their horses in the yard, their faces hard beneath pulled-down hats. Both wore gun belts, and their mounts bore the saloon's brand. A fist hammered on the door. "Harper, open up. State your business," Jaden called, shotgun ready but not raised. "Mr. Calloway sent us to collect what's his," one man shouted back. "That girl's payment for her daddy's debt, fair and square. Hand her over peaceful-like, and there won't be trouble. Miss May is no man's property." Jaden's voice was steel. "She's under my protection, legal and proper. Best ride on back and tell Calloway that." There was muttered conversation outside. Then the second man spoke up. "Don't be a fool, Harper. You can't keep her locked up here forever. Sooner or later, you'll have to come to town, and we'll be waiting." "That's your final word?" Jaden asked. "For now. But we'll be back. Count on it." Hoofbeats faded into the snowy silence. Jaden waited several long minutes before lowering the shotgun. When he turned, Madeline was trembling. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I've brought nothing but trouble to your door." "No," Jaden said firmly. "The trouble comes from men like Calloway, thinking they can own folks. You've brought nothing here but goodness." They spent the evening by the fire, each lost in thought. Jaden cleaned his shotgun methodically, while Madeline mended a tear in one of his shirts. The familiar tasks were soothing, but tension lingered in the air. As the fire burned low, Madeline set aside her sewing. "Dear Lord," she prayed softly, her voice barely a whisper, "please keep this good man safe. He's risked so much for me. Don't let harm come to him on my account." Jaden glanced up, touched by her concern. "The Lord watches over his own," he said gently. "We'll face whatever comes together." Outside, the snow continued to fall, wrapping the cabin in white silence. But within, two hearts beat stronger, for no longer being alone. The following morning dawned clear and cold, frost sparkling on the window panes. Jaden stood before the cabin's small mirror, carefully trimming his beard while Madeline pressed his best shirt with the flat iron. "Are you certain about this?" Madeline asked, her hand smoothing the fabric. "The church social. Folks will talk." Jaden turned from the mirror, his expression gentle but determined. "Let them talk. You deserve to walk proud, same as anyone. Hiding away won't change hearts." They hitched Moses to the wagon as the sun climbed higher. Madeline wore her Sunday dress, freshly mended, with a blue ribbon Jaden had brought her from his storage chest. The drive into town was quiet, both lost in their thoughts as the wagon wheels creaked over the frozen ground. Pine Ridge's social hall glowed with lamplight as they approached, fiddle music drifting through the evening air. Several wagons were already tied up outside, and groups of townsfolk gathered on the wooden walkway, their conversations falling silent as Jaden helped Madeline down from the wagon. "Hold your head high," he whispered, offering his arm. She took it, trying to steady her trembling hands. As they stepped through the doors, the warmth and light washed over them. Paper lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a gentle glow over the gathered crowd. Tables lined the walls, laden with pies and preserves brought by the church ladies. The fiddler played from a raised platform at one end, his bow dancing across the strings. Whispers rippled through the room. Madeline felt the stares, heard the barely concealed snickers. Her grip tightened on Jaden's arm. "Well now, welcome." Reverend Alden's voice cut through the murmurs as he strode forward, hand extended. "Brother Harper, Sister May, I'm so pleased you could join us this evening." The preacher's warm greeting seemed to break some of the tension. A few of the older women nodded politely, though others turned their backs demonstratively. "Much obliged, Reverend," Jaden replied, shaking his hand firmly. They found seats along the wall, watching as couples began to gather for a dance. The fiddler struck up a lively reel, and the floor filled with swirling skirts and stamping boots. Jaden watched Madeline's face as she followed the dancers with her eyes. There was longing there, beneath the fear. He stood, brushing off his trousers, and held out his hand. "Miss May," he said formally, "would you honor me with this dance?" Color flooded her cheeks. I don't know if I..." She glanced around nervously at the watching crowd. "Just follow my lead," he said softly. "You can trust me." Trembling, she placed her hand in his. He led her onto the floor just as the fiddler began, a gentle waltz. Jaden's hand settled respectfully at her waist, and he guided her into the first steps. That's it, he murmured encouragingly. Easy now, like walking through a meadow. At first, her movements were stiff with anxiety, but gradually she began to relax into the rhythm. Jaden was a surprisingly graceful dancer for such a large man, and his quiet confidence steadied her. As they turned beneath the lantern light, something shifted in Madeline's heart. The music wrapped around them like a warm blanket, and for a moment, the watching eyes didn't matter. A small laugh escaped her lips, bright and genuine, as Jaden guided her through a turn. Some of the onlookers' expressions softened, seeing her natural grace. Mrs. Peterson, the baker's wife, was heard to remark, "Well, she does move nice, for all her size." Others, particularly a group of younger women near the punch bowl, continued to snicker behind their hands. But Madeline barely noticed now. The joy of movement, of being held with such care and respect, filled her whole world. When the music ended, her eyes were shining. They danced twice more before taking a rest, accepting cups of punch from Reverend Alden's wife. As they stood near the refreshment table, a tall figure approached quietly from the shadows. It was Henry, the Ute Scout. He nodded respectfully to Madeline before turning to Jaden. "Need word with you," he said in his low, measured voice. "Important matter." Jaden squeezed Madeline's hand reassuringly before stepping aside with Henry. The scout's dark eyes were serious as he spoke. "Worked for her father last spring," Henry said, gesturing slightly toward Madeline. "Saw things at saloon. Callaway's games rigged. Marked cards, loaded dice. Been cheating ranchers for years." Jaden's eyes narrowed. "You saw this yourself?" Henry nodded. "Many times. Kept quiet then. Who would believe Indian's word? But now." He glanced at Madeline. "She good person. Deserves truth. Will testify if needed." "That's mighty brave of you," Jaden said quietly. "Could be dangerous." "Truth matters more than fear," Henry replied simply. He touched his chest. "Here, I know this right thing." "I'm much obliged to you, friend," Jaden said, extending his hand. Henry clasped it firmly before melting back into the shadows. The social was winding down as Jaden rejoined Madeline. They said their goodbyes to Reverend Alden and made their way outside. The night had grown cold, stars sparkling like diamonds in the black sky. Jaden helped Madeline into the wagon and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders before climbing up himself. As Moses plodded homeward, Madeline leaned against Jaden's arm. "Thank you," she whispered. "For tonight. For everything. No need for thanks." "But there is," she insisted softly. "Tonight, when we were dancing, for the first time in my life, I felt beautiful." Jaden's arm tightened around her. "You are beautiful," he said simply. "Always have been." They rode on through the starlit night. The wagon's gentle sway and the steady clip of Moses's hooves, the only sounds. Above them, the Milky Way stretched like a river of light across the heavens, while behind them, the warm glow of the social hall gradually faded into darkness. Dawn painted the Colorado mountains in shades of gold and purple as Madeline stepped out of the cabin. The crisp morning air nipped at her cheeks, but her heart felt lighter than it had in years. She carried a bucket of fresh oats toward the small barn where Moses, Jaden's faithful mule, waited for his breakfast. "Good morning, you handsome fellow," she cooed, reaching up to scratch behind his ears. Moses pressed his velvety nose against her palm, nickering softly. "Hungry, are you? Well, I reckon these oats will fix that right up." As she poured the feed into Moses's trough, a quiet tune rose to her lips, an old hymn her grandmother used to sing. The simple melody floated through the morning air while she worked, checking Moses's hooves and brushing his coat until it gleamed. Through the open barn door, she could see Jaden at his workbench, the steady rhythm of stone against steel marking his progress as he sharpened their tools. The sight of him, shoulders bent in concentration over his work, brought a warm smile to her face. Here, in this small corner of the world, she had found something she'd never thought possible. A place where she truly belonged. The thunder of approaching hoofbeats shattered the peaceful morning. Madeline stepped out of the barn, shading her eyes against the Sunday. Her heart lurched at the sight of Sheriff Duncan, leading 3 deputies up the trail, their horses kicking up dust. In the cold morning air, Jaden set down his whetstone and stood, his expression wary as the lawmen dismounted. "Sheriff," he said evenly, "what brings you out so early?" Sheriff Duncan's face was grim as he pulled a folded paper from his vest. Got no pleasure in this, Harper, but I'm carrying a warrant for your arrest. What? Madeline gasped, hurrying forward. That's not possible. Interference with a lawful debt contract, Duncan read from the warrant. By harboring property claimed as collateral and refusing to surrender same to its rightful owner. Property? Jaden's voice was dangerous and low. A human being ain't property, Sheriff. You know that's not right. Law's the law, Duncan replied, though he couldn't quite meet Jaden's eyes. The contract's been reviewed by Judge Wilson. It's binding. That contract was built on cheating and lies. Madeline cried out. The games were rigged. We have a witness. But the sheriff was already motioning to his deputies. They moved forward with iron chains clinking between their hands. Don't resist, Harper, Duncan warned. Don't make this worse than it has to be. Jaden stood perfectly still as the deputies approached, though every muscle in his body was tense. I won't fight you, he said quietly. But mark my words, this ain't justice. Madeline rushed forward as they began shackling his wrists, tears streaming down her face. No, please. You can't take him. She clutched at Jaden's shirt, pressing her face against his chest. Please don't leave me alone again. Hush now, Jaden murmured, wishing he could wrap his arms around her. The chains prevented even that small comfort. You're stronger than you know, Madeline May. Don't you give up. Time to go, Duncan announced gruffly. The deputies took Jaden's arms, leading him toward their horses. I'll fight for you, Madeline called after him, her voice breaking. I promise, Jaden, I'll find a way. Jaden managed to turn his head as they lifted him onto a horse. I know you will, he said softly. Stay strong, my love. She stood rooted to the spot as the riders departed, taking Jaden away in chains. The sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance, leaving only the whisper of wind through the pines and the quiet shuffling of Moses in his stall. Her legs gave way then, and she sank to her knees in the dirt. Sobs racked her body as she stared at the empty trail where Jaden had disappeared. The morning that had started so peacefully now felt like a nightmare she couldn't escape. The crackle of the cabin's fire drew her back inside eventually. She huddled close to its warmth, arms wrapped around herself, trying to still her trembling, but the silence of the cabin pressed in around her, making it hard to breathe. Every object, Jaden's coffee cup still on the table, his worn Bible on the shelf, his jacket hanging by the door, seemed to mock her with his absence. The sound of wagon wheels sometime later barely registered through her grief. It wasn't until a gentle knock came at the door that she lifted her head. Miss May? Reverend Alden's familiar voice called out. Are you there, child? Madeline wiped her eyes and went to open the door. The preacher's kind face creased with concern as he took in her tear-stained cheeks. I came as soon as I heard, he said softly. May I come in? She nodded mutely, stepping aside to let him enter. He settled into one of the rough-hewn chairs while she mechanically went about making coffee, grateful for something to do with her hands. They took him away in chains, she whispered, setting a steaming cup before him. Like a criminal. But he's done nothing wrong. Nothing but show kindness to someone who needed it. I know, Reverend Alden said gravely. But we mustn't despair. This isn't over yet. What can we do? Madeline sank into the other chair, her voice small and lost. The sheriff said the judge already reviewed the contract. Ah, but he hasn't heard all the evidence. The preacher leaned forward earnestly. Henry, the scout, came to me this morning. He's willing to testify about the gambling fraud, and I've been speaking with other ranchers who lost money at Callaway's tables. They're starting to come forward too. A tiny spark of hope flickered in Madeline's chest. You really think we can fight this? With God's help, yes. Reverend Alden reached across the table to pat her hand. I'm calling for a proper hearing. The truth will come out. We just have to be patient and trust in the Lord's timing. Madeline nodded slowly, drawing strength from his steady faith. What should I do? Pray, he said simply, and stay strong. Show the town that what they see as weakness is actually courage in disguise. He stood, settling his hat back on his head. Come to the church whenever you need to. You're not alone in this fight. After the preacher left, Madeline tended to Moses and the chickens, trying to keep to the routine she and Jaden had established. But as evening approached, the walls of the cabin seemed to close in around her. She saddled Moses and rode into town, seeking the peace of the empty church. The small wooden building was dark and quiet when she slipped inside. A few candles still burned near the altar, their flames reflecting off the colored glass windows. Magdalene made her way down the center aisle and knelt at the rail. "Please," she whispered into the silence. "Please help him. He sacrificed everything to protect me. Don't let him suffer for it." Tears slid down her cheeks as she continued praying, pouring out her fear and longing and determination. Outside, snow began to fall, thick white flakes drifting past the windows. The soft hush settled over the town like a blanket, muffling all sound except the whisper of her prayers. As the candles burned lower, something shifted in Madeline's heart. The helpless grief of the morning transformed into steel resolve. Jaden had believed in her worth when no one else did. He had shown her that she was strong, capable, worthy of love and respect. She would not let his faith in her be wasted. Rising from her knees, Madeline stood straight and tall in the quiet church. The woman who had once cowered from cruel words and mockery was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone who would fight for justice, no matter the cost. "Hold on, Jaden," she whispered. "I'm coming for you." The snow continued to fall as she made her way back to Moses, the white flakes catching in her hair like a crown. Though the world seemed muffled and strange in the gathering storm, her purpose rang clear and true in her heart. Jaden's sacrifice would not be in vain. Whatever it took, she would see him free again. Dawn crept over the mountain peaks, painting the snow-dusted pines in shades of pink and gold. Magdalene stood at the cabin door, gripping the worn leather of Jaden's coin purse. The few coins inside clinked softly as her fingers tightened around it. She drew in a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "Time to be brave," she whispered to herself, echoing words Jaden had spoken just days ago when teaching her to split wood. Moses nickered softly from his stall, and Madeline patted his nose before setting out. The walk into Pine Ridge would take an hour, but she needed the time to gather her courage. Each step carried her further from the safety of the cabin and closer to the town that had mocked her so cruelly. The morning air was crisp, her breath forming small clouds as she walked. Birds called from the trees, and a rabbit darted across her path. These simple things reminded her of the peace she'd found with Jaden, strengthening her resolve. As she crested the final ridge overlooking Pine Ridge, the sight of the town below made her stomach clench. Smoke rose from chimneys, wagons creaked along the streets, and people moved about their morning business. It all looked so ordinary, as if her world hadn't been torn apart just yesterday. Taking another, steadying breath, Magdalene lifted her chin and walked down the main street. The boardwalk creaked beneath her feet as townsfolk turned to stare. She heard the whispers start immediately. "There she is, the one Harper got arrested over. Fool man, throwing away his freedom for her. Wonder how long before Calloway claims what's his." Magdalene kept her eyes forward, focusing on the general store's weathered sign. Each step felt like walking through deep mud, but she forced herself onward. The store bell jingled as she pushed open the door. Inside, the familiar smells of coffee, leather, and dried goods filled the air. Mr. Hargrove stood behind the counter, his expression carefully neutral as she approached. 3 women shopping nearby fell silent, watching her. "Good morning," Magdalene said, proud that her voice remained steady. "I need flour and beans, please." "Mr." Hargrove nodded, moving to gather her items. The women huddled closer together, whispering and giggling. Magdalene's cheeks burned, but she kept her gaze on the counter. "That'll be 60 cents, Mr. Hargrove said gruffly. Magdalene counted out the coins carefully. As she did, Mrs. Hargrove emerged from the back room. The storekeeper's wife was a thin, quiet woman who rarely spoke above a whisper. Now she moved purposefully to the preserve shelf, selected a jar, and approached the counter. "Here," Mrs. Hargrove murmured, slipping the jar into Magdalene's basket. "Wild blackberry. For strength." Her eyes held unexpected kindness. I can't pay for," Magdalene began. "No charge, Mrs. Hargrove cut in softly. "Some things matter more than money." Tears pricked at Magdalene's eyes, but she blinked them back. "Thank you," she whispered. The bell jingled again as she stepped outside. The morning sun had climbed higher, warming the boardwalk. Magdalene adjusted her basket, ready to head toward the jail, when a shadow fell across her path. Well, the saloon owner's oily voice made her skin crawl. "If it ain't my future property, out for a morning stroll." Calloway stood blocking her way, his fancy vest stretched tight across his belly. His smile didn't reach his cold eyes. "Might as well get used to running errands for me," he continued, reaching to touch her cheek. "Once the judge confirms my claim, you'll be doing plenty of that." Madeline jerked back from his touch. Something hot and fierce rose in her chest, the same strength she'd found while splitting logs under Jaden's guidance. "I am not property," she declared, her voice ringing clear in the morning air. "I belong to no man. Not you. Not anyone." Calloway's smile twisted into a sneer. Bold words from a woman whose protector sits in chains. "We'll see how long that spirit lasts once Harper's gone for good." "The truth will come out," Madeline shot back. "About your rigged games and false contracts." His face darkened. "Watch yourself, girl. Accidents happen to those who spread lies about honest businessmen." "Is that a threat, Mr. Calloway?" Reverend Alden's stern voice cut through the tension. The preacher stood a few paces away, his Bible tucked under one arm. Calloway's smile returned, smooth as snake oil. "Just having a friendly chat with my future employee. Good day to you both." He tipped his hat and strolled away. "Are you all right, child?" Reverend Alden asked quietly. Madeline nodded, though her hands shook slightly. "I need to see Jaden," she said. "I'll walk with you to the jail." The sheriff's office was quiet when they arrived. Deputy Mills dozed in his chair while Jaden sat in the cell, reading his small Bible by the barred window's light. His face lit up when he saw Madeline, though concern clouded his eyes as he took in her trembling hands. "What happened?" he demanded, moving to the bars. "Calloway," she admitted softly. "But I stood up to him. Jaden. I told him I wasn't property." Pride replaced the worry in Jaden's expression. "That's my girl," he murmured. "You're stronger than any of them." "No. I'm scared," she whispered. "What if the judge believes those false contracts? Remember splitting that oak log?" Jaden's voice was gentle but firm. "How it seemed impossible at first, but you kept at it, found your stance, and powered through. This is no different." Madeline nodded, drawing strength from his steady gaze. "Henry's going to testify about the rigged games. Others are coming forward too." "Good." Jaden reached through the bars to squeeze her hand. "Don't give up hope. God's got a plan in all this." "I miss you," she breathed, clutching his fingers. "I miss you too, love. But you're doing just fine. Keep your head high. You've got nothing to be ashamed of." Deputy Mills stirred then, clearing his throat. "Time's up," he announced, though not unkindly. Madeline reluctantly released Jaden's hand. "I'll be back tomorrow." "I'll be here," he smiled. "Stay strong, Madeline May." The walk back to the cabin seemed longer than before. Her basket felt heavy, but the jar of preserves reminded her she wasn't entirely alone. Mrs. Hargrove's small kindness gave her hope that others might find their courage too. Evening shadows stretched across the yard as Madeline approached the cabin. She built up the fire and lit the lantern, its warm glow pushing back the gathering dark. The quiet pressed in around her as she prepared a simple supper of beans and cornbread. Sitting at the rough table, she closed her eyes. "I will stand," she whispered to herself. "I will fight, no matter what comes tomorrow." The lantern flickered, casting her shadow tall against the cabin wall. Outside, a whip-poor-will called into the deepening dusk, its lonely song echoing across the ridges. But Madeline sat straight-backed in her chair, no longer bowed by the weight of others' cruelty. She was finding her own strength, one step at a time. The days stretched like molasses without Jaden. Madeline woke each morning to the mule's soft nickering, demanding breakfast. The routine of caring for the animals gave structure to her lonely hours. She'd never managed a homestead alone before, but necessity proved a stern teacher. Dawn painted the sky pink as she hauled water from the creek, 2 buckets at a time. The metal handles bit into her palms, but she noticed her arms growing stronger. After feeding the chickens and the mule, she'd split kindling for the day's fires. The axe felt more natural in her hands now. "You were right, Jaden," she whispered one morning, watching splinters fly. "These hands can build." Inside the cabin, she kept everything exactly as Jaden had left it. His coffee cup sat waiting by the stove, his spare shirt hung from a peg. Sometimes she caught herself talking to these silent reminders of him, sharing small victories or asking advice. The empty evenings were hardest. After supper, she'd sit by the fire, missing their quiet conversations. But even loneliness was teaching her something about strength. On Sunday morning, Madeline dressed in her cleanest dress, though her hands shook as she pinned up her hair. Going to church alone meant facing the whole town's stares. Still, she squared her shoulders and set out, walking the familiar trail into Pine Ridge. The church bell rang clear across the valley, calling the faithful. Madeline's steps slowed as she approached the white clapboard building. Wagons and buggies clustered outside, while townspeople gathered on the steps in their Sunday best. Conversation died as she drew near. Mrs. Peterson grabbed her daughter's arm, pulling her aside as if Madeline's presence might contaminate the girl. Others simply stared or whispered behind raised hands. Madeline forced herself to climb the steps, head high. Inside, she slipped into the last pew, trying to make herself small. The familiar scents of beeswax candles and hymnal pages surrounded her. She closed her eyes, drawing comfort from the peace of the sanctuary. Reverend Alden's voice rang out strong and clear as he began the service. They sang Amazing Grace, the harmony swelling around her. For a moment, Madeline forgot her troubles, lifted by the music. The sermon text came from Psalm 27. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" Reverend Alden's gaze found Madeline as he spoke. "God sees those the world calls lowly," he declared. "He lifts up the downtrodden. When others mock or despise his children, his love remains steadfast." Tears pricked Madeline's eyes, but she held them back. The message felt like a balm to her wounded spirit. After the final hymn, while others filed out to gossip on the church steps, Henry approached her pew. The Ute Scout moved quietly, respecting the sanctuary's peace. "Miss May," he said softly, "I have news." Madeline turned eagerly. "About the evidence?" Henry nodded. 2 more men came forward. They lost cattle to Calloway's rigged games. They will speak truth at hearing. "Thank you," Madeline whispered fervently, "for helping us." "Justice matters," Henry replied simply. "Truth matters more than fear." His quiet dignity reminded her of Jaden. Both men shared that core of steel beneath gentle exteriors. The walk home felt lighter, hope warming her heart despite the autumn chill. At the cabin, Madeline built up the fire and settled at Jaden's rough-hewn table. Paper and pencil lay ready. "Dear Jaden," she wrote carefully, "I want to thank you for seeing worth in me when no one else did. That day in town, when you stopped my father's cruelty, you gave me more than shelter. You gave me a chance to discover my own strength. The cabin feels empty without you, but I'm learning to stand tall. Each morning I tend your animals and keep your home, finding purpose in honest work. My hands grow stronger splitting wood. My heart grows braver facing town alone. I never dreamed I could manage alone. Yet here I am, surviving. More than surviving. Growing. You taught me that. Whatever happens at the hearing, know that your kindness changed. Tell me, I am not the same frightened girl you rescued. Because of you, I found courage to believe in myself. Asterisk. With deepest gratitude, Madeline Times. She folded the letter carefully, knowing she couldn't deliver it but needing to express her feelings somehow. The paper went into her apron pocket, close to her heart. Evening settled over the cabin as Madeline prepared her simple supper. The coffee pot bubbled on the stove when hoofbeats approached outside. Her heart leaped, then steadied as she recognized Reverend Alden's mare. "Evening, child," the preacher called, dismounting. His expression held news. Madeline's hands trembled as she poured coffee. "Please, come in, Reverend." He settled in Jaden's chair, accepting the cup she offered. "I've just come from speaking with Judge Morrison," he said. "The hearing is set for Wednesday morning. 3 days." Madeline sank onto a stool, gripping her own coffee cup for stability. "The saloon owner will present his claims first," Reverend Alden continued. "Then we'll bring forward our witnesses about the fraud. You'll need to testify too, Madeline." "Me?" Her voice quavered. "What can I say?" "The truth, child. About your father's gambling, the rigged games, how Calloway tried claiming you as property." His kind eyes held hers. "Your voice matters in this." Madeline stared into the fire, fear warring with determination in her chest. The thought of speaking before the whole town terrified her, yet she couldn't let Jaden down. Will they let me see Jaden before Wednesday?" she asked softly. "I'll speak to the sheriff tomorrow," Reverend Alden promised. "Now, shall we pray together?" Madeline knelt beside her chair, the rough floorboards pressing into her knees. The preacher's steady voice washed over her as he asked for wisdom, courage, and justice to prevail. "Lord," Madeline added in a whisper, "help me be strong enough for this battle." After Reverend Alden rode away, Madeline sat long by the fire. The flames painted shadows on the cabin walls, while her mind raced with all she must say at the hearing. The truth seemed both simple and terrifyingly complex. She pulled out the letter from her pocket, reading over her own words. "I am not the same frightened girl. No," she murmured to the quiet cabin. "I'm not that girl anymore." The fire crackled softly, like gentle encouragement. Outside, a lone coyote called across the valley. Madeline straightened her shoulders, feeling steel enter her spine. 3 days to prepare. 3 days to gather her courage. 3 days until she could help free the man who had freed her heart. She would be ready. Dawn crept over Pine Ridge with hesitant fingers, painting the clouds a sullen gray. Madeline stood at the cabin window, watching the first pale light filter through the pines. Her hands trembled as she smoothed her best dress. A simple brown wool garment, clean but showing wear at the cuffs. The familiar routine of morning chores steadied her nerves. She fed the chickens one last time, patted the mule's velvety nose, and made sure everything was secure. The cabin looked lonely as she latched the door, not knowing when, or if, she would return. Hoofbeats and wagon wheels announced Reverend Alden's arrival. Henry rode alongside on his paint pony, his face grave but determined. The morning air bit sharp and cold as Madeline climbed into the wagon beside the preacher. "The Lord goes before us," Reverend Alden said quietly, clucking to his horses. The wagon creaked and swayed along the rutted road into town. Madeline's fingers worried at her dress hem as Pine Ridge's buildings came into view. Already, people gathered on the boardwalks, pointing and whispering as they passed. The courthouse stood 2 stories tall, its weather-beaten clapboards pale in the morning light. Wagons and horses crowded the street outside. It seemed the whole town had turned out for the hearing. Henry dismounted first, offering his hand to help Madeline down from the wagon. His grip was steady, grounding her. "Remember," he said in his quiet way, "truth has power." They climbed the courthouse steps together, the preacher, the Ute scout, and the woman they defended. Inside, wooden benches groaned under the weight of curious townsfolk. The air felt thick with whispers and judgmental stares. Madeline's heart leaped painfully as deputies led Jaden in. Iron shackles clinked at his wrists, but he held his head high. His eyes found hers across the room, warm and unwavering. In that steady gaze, she found the courage to straighten her shoulders. Judge Morrison entered, his black robe sweeping as he took his seat behind the high desk. The room fell silent. "This hearing," he intoned, "concerns the matter of alleged debt collection rights over the person of Miss Madeline May." The saloon owner, Mr. Calloway, strutted forward in his fancy vest, waving a sheaf of papers. "Your Honor," he announced with an oily smile, "I hold here legitimate markers signed by Thomas May, pledging his daughter, his property, as collateral against substantial gambling debts." Madeline's hands clenched in her lap as Calloway continued. "The girl's nothing but a burden anyway. Look at her. Who'd want such a fat, useless creature? I'm doing Harper a favor, saving him from his foolish impulse." Cruel chuckles rippled through the crowd. "Furthermore," Calloway pressed, "this mountain man had no right to interfere with a legal business arrangement. He should remain jailed for his presumption." Judge Morrison's eyes narrowed. "Miss May," he said, "do you wish to speak?" Madeline's legs shook as she stood. The room swam before her eyes, faces blurring into a hostile sea. But then she found Jaden's gaze again, steady as a lighthouse in a storm. She drew a deep breath. "Your Honor," she began, her voice trembling but growing stronger with each word. "I stand before you not as property to be traded, but as a child of God, made in his image." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Women whispered behind their hands while men shifted uncomfortably. "My father's choices were his own," Madeline continued, "but I am not a cow to be sold, nor a horse to be traded. I am a person, with a heart that feels and a soul that yearns for dignity." Her voice rang clearer now, filling the hushed room. "The law may once have seen women as property, but God never did, and neither did Jaden Harper, who alone saw me as worthy of respect and protection." Judge Morrison leaned forward, studying her intently. "You speak well, Miss May. But there is still the matter of these signed documents. Henry stepped forward, his moccasins silent on the wooden floor. Your Honor, I worked for Thomas May last year. I saw how Calloway rigged his games, marked his cards, forged debt papers when men were too drunk to know what they signed. The saloon owner's face darkened. You'd take an Indian's word over proper documents? I would take truth from any honest tongue, Judge Morrison replied sharply. Continue, sir. Henry described in detail how Calloway's men cheated at cards, how they plied men with whiskey before presenting inflated debt notes, how they threatened families who complained. Other witnesses came forward, farmers and ranchers who'd lost cattle and land to similar schemes. Reverend Alden rose last, his voice ringing with authority. Your Honor, beyond the fraud evident here lies a deeper moral wrong. No human being can be rightfully claimed as property. Such practice violates both God's law and human dignity. The judge's weathered face was grave as he considered. The courthouse fell so silent, Madeline could hear the autumn wind rattling the windows. Her heart pounded as she waited, praying silently. This matter requires further deliberation, Judge Morrison announced finally. Court will recess until tomorrow morning. His gavel cracked like thunder in the quiet room. The crowd began to stir and murmur. Deputies moved to lead Jaden away. Again. As he passed close to Madeline, his fingers brushed hers ever so gently. Though no words were spoken, his touch conveyed all his pride and faith in her. Madeline remained seated as the courthouse slowly emptied, her legs too shaky to trust. Henry stood like a guardian at her shoulder while Reverend Alden spoke quietly with the judge's clerk. Outside, the gray sky had darkened further, threatening snow. But inside, Madeline's heart, a warm flame of hope flickered. She had found her voice at last. Whether it would be enough to free Jaden remained to be seen. But she had spoken her truth without flinching. The truth about her worth. The truth about dignity. The truth about love that sees past surface to soul. Now they could only wait and pray and trust that justice would prevail. Morning dawned crisp and cold over Pine Ridge. Frost glittered on the courthouse steps as townsfolk gathered once again, their breath forming clouds in the chilly air. Madeline arrived early with Reverend Alden and Henry, her hands clutching a worn Bible for strength. She had barely slept, spending most of the night in prayer. Inside, the courthouse buzzed with whispers and shuffling feet. More people packed the benches than yesterday, word having spread about Madeline's brave testimony. She caught glimpses of familiar faces. Mrs. Hargrove from the general store, the blacksmith's wife, several ranchers who had done business with her father. When the deputies brought Jaden in, his chains rattling against the floorboards, Madeline's heart ached. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, but his gaze held steady when it met hers. Even in shackles, he carried himself with quiet dignity. Judge Morrison entered, his black robe sweeping behind him. The room fell silent as he took his seat. This court will hear additional testimony regarding the claimed debt contract over Miss Madeline May, he announced, his voice carrying to every corner. Who wishes to speak first? Marcus Tanner, owner of the feed store, stood up, his face twisted with spite as he pointed at Madeline. That girl's father was a drunk and a fool. The debt's legitimate. Let Calloway have her. She's naught but a burden on decent folk. Cruel murmurs of agreement rippled through part of the crowd. Madeline's cheeks burned, but she held her head high, remembering Jaden's faith in her. I speak in opposition, came a clear voice. Martha Wilson, the midwife, rose from her bench. I've known Madeline May since she was born. When fever struck 2 winters past, she helped me tend the sick without thought for herself. She may be heavy-set, but her heart is pure gold. That's right, added elderly Mrs. Peterson, struggling to her feet. When my Arthur was laid up with his broken leg, that girl brought us soup every week. Never asked for thanks, neither. More voices joined in. Folks Madeline had almost forgotten helping over the years. Mending clothes for widows, reading to children after Sunday school, sharing vegetables from her father's garden. Each memory landed like a warm drop of hope in her heart. The saloon owner, Mr. Calloway, stalked forward, his fancy boots clicking on the wooden floor. His face had grown red with fury. This is nonsense. I have a signed contract. The law is the law. He whirled toward those who had spoken for Madeline. Those who cross me tend to find themselves unwelcome in Pine Ridge. Perhaps some of you should consider that before speaking further. Are you threatening witnesses in my courtroom? Judge Morrison's voice cracked like winter ice. "Simply stating facts, Your Honor," Calloway replied with an oily smile. "Business is business, after all." Henry stepped forward then, his moccasins silent on the floorboards. From his leather pouch, he drew out a thin book bound in faded canvas. "I have here the true ledger from Thomas May's ranch," he said quietly. "I kept it myself last year, marking every debt and payment." Calloway's face went pale. "That's nothing but Indian scratching. It has no standing here." "Henry's word has always been true," Reverend Alden spoke up. "The whole territory knows it. Let the ledger be examined." Judge Morrison nodded to his clerk, who took the book and began studying the neat columns of figures. Minutes stretched like hours as he compared it to Calloway's claimed debt papers. The courthouse held its breath. Finally, the clerk looked up. "Your Honor, according to these records, Thomas May's gambling debts were paid in full 3 months ago. These new markers." He held up Calloway's papers. "They appear to be forgeries." The saloon owner lunged forward with a snarl. "You're all conspiring against me. I'll see this town burn before—" "Silence!" Judge Morrison's gavel crashed down like thunder. The room froze. "I have heard enough. This court finds the alleged debt contract null and void, based on clear evidence of fraud. Miss Madeline May is hereby declared a free woman, subject to no claim or obligation. Furthermore," he fixed Calloway with a steely glare, "the sheriff will investigate these allegations of forgery and intimidation. Mr. Harper is to be released immediately." For a moment, nobody moved. Then the deputies stepped forward, unlocking Jaden's shackles. They fell away with a clank that echoed through the stunned courthouse. Joy burst through the room like sunlight through storm clouds. Several people began to cheer. "Mrs. Wilson wrapped Madeline in a tearful embrace." Henry smiled, nodding once in quiet satisfaction. Calloway backed toward the door, his face twisted with rage. "This isn't over," he spat. "You'll regret this. All of you." He shoved his way through the crowd and vanished. But Madeline barely heard him. Her entire world had narrowed to Jaden, walking toward her with arms outstretched. She flew into his embrace, tears streaming down her face. His arms closed around her, strong and sure, as if they'd never let go again. "You were so brave," he whispered against her hair. "So brave, my love." Madeline could only hold him tighter, her heart too full for words. They clung to each other as the courthouse slowly emptied around them, neither caring who watched. Reverend Alden laid a gentle hand on both their shoulders, murmuring a quiet blessing. Outside, the afternoon sun had broken through the clouds, painting the street in gold. Townspeople gathered in small groups, some still shaking their heads in wonder at the morning's events. Others smiled and nodded as Jaden and Madeline emerged, hands clasped tight. "Look at them," Mrs. Peterson said loudly to her neighbor. "That's real love, that is. Makes me remember my Arthur in our young days." Even some who had mocked before seemed touched by the sight of them together, the mountain man and his chosen bride, their faces glowing with joy and relief. A few women wiped tears from their eyes. Down the street, they glimpsed Calloway slinking into his saloon, slamming the bat-wing doors behind him. His muttered threats carried on the wind, but they seemed hollow now, stripped of power by truth and justice. As the sun began its slow descent toward the mountains, Jaden and Madeline walked hand in hand toward home. Their boots crunched on the frosted ground, their breath mingling in the cooling air. Neither spoke much. They didn't need to. Everything that mattered lay in the warm clasp of their fingers, the steady rhythm of their steps falling into perfect sync. They passed the church, where Reverend Alden was already lighting lanterns for evening service. He smiled and raised his hand in blessing as they went by. A little further on, Henry rode past on his paint pony, touching his hat with quiet dignity. The shadows stretched long and purple across the road as they neared the little line shack. It looked different somehow, more like home than ever before. Smoke curled from the chimney where Mrs. Wilson had thoughtfully built up the fire before they returned. Just before they reached the door, Jaden paused, turning to face Madeline. The last rays of sunset caught in her hair like a crown of copper and gold. Her eyes shone with a confidence he'd always seen waiting to bloom. They stood there a moment in the gathering dusk, free at last to begin their life together. Behind them lay the town, with all its judgment and cruelty. Ahead stretched a future they would build with their own hands. on foundation of love that had proved stronger than any chain. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the rough-hewn walls of the lined shack. Madeline sat in Jaden's old wooden rocker, her hands folded quietly in her lap. The events of the day felt almost like a dream. The courtroom, Henry's ledger, the judge's ruling, and finally, wonderfully, Jaden's chains falling away. Jaden added another log to the fire, the flames leaping up to catch the fresh wood. He moved with the easy grace she'd come to love, settling on the bench nearby. Neither had spoken much since returning home. Sometimes joy runs too deep for words. The kettle whistled on the iron stove. Madeline rose to make tea, finding comfort in the familiar ritual. Her hands barely trembled now as she measured the leaves, so different from her first nervous days in this cabin. She brought 2 steaming cups back to the fire, passing one to Jaden. "Thank you," he said softly, but his eyes said so much more. They sat in comfortable silence, sipping tea and watching the flames dance. After a while, Jaden set his cup aside and cleared his throat. "Madeline," he began, then paused, searching for words. She turned to look at him, seeing something almost shy in his usually steady gaze. He slid from the bench to one knee before her, taking her hand in his calloused ones. Madeline's heart began to pound. "I ain't good with fancy words," he said, "but I need you to know something. What I said that day in town, about falling in love with you, it wasn't just to save you. It was true then, and it's even more true now." Tears began sliding down Madeline's cheeks as he continued, his voice growing stronger. "These past weeks, watching you face down every cruel word and hard moment with such grace, seeing your kindness, your strength, your beautiful heart. Madeline May, you're the bravest woman I've ever known, and the most beautiful, inside and out." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple silver ring. "I know I ain't much, just a mountain man with a broken-down cabin, but I love you with everything I am. Will you marry me?" Madeline could hardly see through her tears. "You think I'm beautiful?" she whispered. "More beautiful every day," he answered firmly, "and twice as brave as any man I know." She slid from the rocker to kneel with him on the rough floorboards. "Yes," she breathed. "Oh yes, I'll marry you." Jaden's hands shook slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he gathered her close, and they held each other, laughing and crying at once. The firelight caught the simple silver band, making it glow like a star. When they finally drew apart, Madeline touched the ring in wonder. "It's perfect," she said. "Where did you?" "Been carrying it since that first night," Jaden admitted. "Bought it from Mrs. Hargrove at the store months ago, though I never thought I'd find someone to give it to. But when I saw you that day," he shook his head, "something in my heart just knew." They settled back by the fire, but this time Madeline sat close beside him on the bench, their shoulders touching. Together they began to plan their wedding, dreams spilling out like water from a spring. "Nothing fancy," Madeline said quickly. "Just simple and true, like us." Jaden squeezed her hand. "The church, maybe. If Reverend Alden's willing, that would be perfect." She smiled, imagining it. "And perhaps some wildflowers for decorations? The meadow's full of them now." "Whatever you want, love." He kissed her temple. "Though, we should do it soon, before winter sets in proper." They talked late into the night, making plans and sharing hopes. Madeline would wear her best dress, freshly pressed. Jaden promised to get a haircut and a new shirt. They'd invite the townspeople who'd stood by them, Mrs. Wilson, Mrs. Peterson, Henry, and of course Reverend Alden. When exhaustion finally drove them to bed, Jaden still insisting on taking the floor despite her protests, Madeline lay awake for a long time, watching moonlight paint silver patterns on the wall. The ring on her finger caught the light now and then, reminding her this wasn't just another dream. Dawn came crisp and bright, full of promise. They shared a quick breakfast of coffee and cornbread, then set to work with renewed energy. Their home needed attention after the days of disruption, but now every task felt like a joy. Jaden climbed onto the roof, hammer in hand, to fix some loose shingles. The steady rhythm of his work filled the morning air. Madeline could see his shoulders moving as she worked in the small garden patch, pulling weeds and dreaming of next spring's plantings. The soil felt good between her fingers as she tucked some late turnip seeds into the earth, she hummed while she worked, an old hymn her mother used to sing. From above came an answering whistle, making her smile. Around mid-morning, the sound of hoofbeats approached. Jaden quickly climbed down from the roof, moving protectively toward Madeline. But it was only Henry on his paint pony. The Ute scout dismounted gracefully, leading his horse to the water trough. "Good morning, friends," he said, touching his hat. His sharp eyes noticed the ring on Madeline's finger at once, and a rare smile crossed his face. "I see congratulations are in order." Jaden stepped forward to shake his hand. "We're grateful for all you did, Henry. We wouldn't be here without your help." Henry nodded gravely. Truth must always come to light. He reached into his saddlebag and brought out a small package wrapped in deerskin. "A gift for the future bride. My sister made it." Madeline unwrapped the bundle carefully to find a beautifully beaded medicine pouch, worked in blue and white. "It's lovely," she breathed. "Please thank her for me. She says it brings good fortune to new beginnings." Henry's expression grew more serious. "But I also come with warning. Calloway was drinking heavy in his saloon all night, making threats. I will watch the trail, keep you informed if trouble stirs." "Much obliged," Jaden said quietly. "We'll keep alert." They shared coffee with Henry before he rode out, promising to return soon. As his pony disappeared around the bend, Madeline touched the beaded pouch thoughtfully. "We have good friends," she said. "That we do." Jaden kissed her cheek. "And we'll need them. Calloway ain't the type to forget." They returned to their work, Jaden to the roof, Madeline to her garden. The sun climbed higher, warming the autumn air. Around noon, they heard another wagon approaching. This time it was Reverend Alden, his old mare plodding steadily up the trail. He carried a basket from his housekeeper, full of fresh bread and preserves. "The church is yours whenever you're ready," he announced after greetings were exchanged. "Mrs. Wilson and some other ladies are already planning to help decorate. They're determined to make it special." Madeline blushed, still unused to such kindness. "That's too much trouble." "Nonsense," the Reverend said firmly. "Let people show their love. It helps heal the whole community." He smiled at them both. "How does 2 weeks from Sunday sound?" "That gives time for preparations but beats the worst of winter weather." Jaden took Madeline's hand. "If that suits you, love." She nodded, happiness bubbling up inside her. 2 weeks from Sunday would be perfect. Reverend Alden stayed for lunch, sharing the fresh bread and some of Madeline's soup. They discussed simple ceremony details, the Reverend offering gentle guidance while respecting their wishes for simplicity. After he left, the afternoon passed in peaceful work. Jaden finished the roof repairs while Madeline cleaned the cabin from top to bottom, already planning where to store her few belongings when she moved in properly after the wedding. As dusk approached, they sat together on the rough-hewn bench by the door, watching the sun sink behind the mountains. The air grew crisp, promising frost by morning. Jaden wrapped his coat around both their shoulders. "Just think," Madeline said softly. "In 2 weeks, this will truly be our home. Together." "It already feels more like home than it ever has," Jaden replied, drawing her close. "Because you're here." They sat quietly in the gathering darkness, dreaming of their future. The first stars began to appear overhead, bright and clear in the mountain sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate, a lonely sound made sweeter by knowing they would never be lonely again. The week before the wedding brought a flurry of activity to Jaden's small mountain cabin. Each morning dawned with new tasks, but neither Madeline nor Jaden minded the work. Every preparation brought them closer to their special day. In the general store, Mrs. Hargrove pulled Madeline aside, pressing a bundle wrapped in brown paper into her hands. "Found these fabric pieces in my sewing chest," she said warmly. "Thought you might make something pretty for your wedding." Madeline unwrapped the package with trembling fingers to find lengths of cream-colored muslin and delicate lace trim. "Oh, Mrs. Hargrove, I couldn't possibly." "Nonsense, dear. Every bride deserves something special." The older woman squeezed her hand. "And I've seen how you sew. You'll make it beautiful." Each evening after her daily chores, Madeline sat by lamplight, carefully stitching her wedding dress. Her fingers moved steadily, creating tiny, even seams. She worked the cream muslin into a simple but elegant design, adding touches of lace at the collar and cuffs. Sometimes she caught Jaden watching her work, his eyes soft with admiration. Outside, the sound of Jaden's hammer rang through the crisp autumn air. He had set himself to building a long table where their wedding guests could feast. Rough-hewn planks slowly took shape under his careful hands. When Madeline brought him coffee, he showed her the smooth surface he had sanded for hours. "Reckon folks should have a proper place to eat," he said, running his hand along the wood. "Even if it ain't fancy." "It's perfect," Madeline assured him, touching the table's sturdy legs. Like their love, it was simple but strong. As the days passed, neighbors began appearing at their door. Mrs. Peterson brought a large jar of golden honey from her hives. "For sweetness in your marriage," she said with a wink. The Wilson family contributed a heavy sack of flour, and Henry appeared one evening with a brace of fresh-shot rabbits for the wedding stew. Each gift moved Madeline deeply. These were the same townspeople who had once laughed at her shame. Now they offered welcome and support, showing how hearts could change. One afternoon, while gathering herbs behind the general store, Madeline overheard two women talking as they hung laundry. "Never would have thought that May girl had such spirit," one said, pinning up a sheet. "Brave as they come," the other agreed. "Standing up in court like that, speaking her piece, and now making a real home with Jaden Harper. Good for her, I say." Madeline pressed her hands to her burning cheeks, joy and disbelief mingling in her heart. She had never thought to hear such words spoken about her. The night before their wedding, Jaden built a fire outside the cabin. They sat together on a log bench, watching the flames dance while stars wheeled overhead. The air held autumn's crispness, but neither felt the cold where their shoulders touched. "Sometimes," Madeline said softly, "I still can't believe this is real. That anyone could want." She trailed off, old hurts rising up. Jaden turned to face her, his eyes serious in the firelight. "Listen to me, Madeline May. You were always worth more than gold. Those folks who couldn't see it were blind as bats at noon." He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle. "The day I saw you on that platform, my heart knew. You were the strongest, most beautiful soul I'd ever met." Tears spilled down Madeline's cheeks. "Even when I was so afraid, so unsure, especially then, because you kept standing, kept trying, no matter what life threw at you." He brushed away her tears with his thumb. "That's real courage, love. And that's what made me fall for you." They sat in comfortable silence after that, hands clasped, watching the stars emerge one by one. The fire slowly died to embers, but neither moved to rebuild it. The night was perfect just as it was. A shooting star streaked across the heavens, leaving a trail of silver light. Madeline caught her breath at its beauty. Beside her, Jaden squeezed her hand. "Make a wish," he whispered. But Madeline just smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. All her wishes were already coming true. Dawn broke gentle and golden over Pine Ridge on the morning of the wedding. Inside the small white church, Henry and several townsmen had strung paper lanterns from the rafters, their warm glow casting soft light across the worn wooden pews. Fresh pine boughs decorated the altar, filling the air with their sweet mountain scent. Reverend Alden stood at the simple pulpit, his Bible open before him. His weathered face held a quiet joy as he watched the church fill steadily with townsfolk. Some came hesitantly, others with bright smiles, but they came until every rough-hewn bench was full. Jaden Harper stood tall near the altar, his broad shoulders straight beneath his best shirt. He had scrubbed it 3 times to remove the permanent timber stains, and though it remained, far from new, it was clean as mountain snow. His usually untamed hair was slicked down with water, and his boots gleamed with fresh polish. His hands, still bearing the calluses of honest work, twisted nervously at his sides. Mrs. Hargrove had helped Madeline prepare in the back room of the church. Now, as the first notes of the old pump organ filled the sanctuary, the door opened. Madeline May stepped through, and a hush fell over the congregation. Her cream-colored dress, lovingly stitched by her own hands, flowed gracefully around her fuller figure. The delicate lace at her throat and wrists caught the lantern light like morning frost, but it was her face that held everyone spellbound. Her eyes shone with joy, her cheeks flushed pink as sunrise. She carried a small bouquet of late wildflowers gathered by the children of the town. As Madeline walked slowly down the narrow aisle, several women dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. Even those who had once mocked her size found themselves moved by the pure radiance of her smile. When she reached Jaden's side, he took her hand as if it were the most precious thing he had ever held. Reverend Alden's voice rang clear in the hushed church. "Dearly beloved," he began, "we gather today to witness not just a wedding, but a testament to God's endless mercy and love's power to redeem." His eyes swept the congregation. "We have seen how true love looks beyond what others scorn, how it lifts up the downtrodden and gives strength to the weary." Tears began streaming down Madeline's cheeks as the Reverend spoke of courage, of second chances, of hearts transformed by grace. Jaden's own eyes grew misty as he gazed at his bride. When the time came for their vows, Jaden's strong voice carried to every corner of the church. "I promise to cherish you, protect you, and remind you every day of your worth," he declared. "You are my heart's choice, now and always." Madeline's voice trembled but held firm. "I promise to stand beside you, support you, and love you with all that I am," she said. "You saw me when I was invisible. You gave me strength when I had none. I give you my heart freely." As Reverend Alden pronounced them husband and wife, the congregation burst into spontaneous applause. Many who had laughed at Madeline months ago now stood, clapping and cheering as Jaden drew her into their first kiss as husband and wife. Outside, the church bells pealed joyfully across the valley. Long tables lined the churchyard, laden with dishes brought by neighbors, fresh bread, roasted venison, pies of every description. The autumn air rang with laughter and conversation. Henry sat on a wooden crate, drawing his bow across his fiddle strings. The music soared sweet and clear, calling children to dance in the dusty yard. Their small feet kicked up puffs of earth as they twirled, their faces bright with delight. Jaden and Madeline moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes. Mrs. Hargrove hugged Madeline tight, whispering, "You make that dress look beautiful, dear." The sheriff, who had once led Jaden away in chains, pumped his hand warmly and offered sincere wishes for their happiness. The newlyweds shared their first dance as husband and wife while Henry played a tender melody. Jaden held Madeline close, his strong arms gentle around her waist. She rested her head on his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and true beneath her cheek. Around them, the community that had once been divided now celebrated as one, bound together by the power of love to heal old wounds and forge new beginnings. The celebration flowed into evening like honey from a jar, sweet and unhurried. Lanterns cast golden pools of light across the churchyard as the autumn air grew crisp. Madeline moved through the gathering with grace, her cream-colored wedding dress catching the lamplight as she filled plates with steaming food. She found her way to where 3 young orphans sat on a wooden bench, their feet dangling above the ground. Their faces lit up as she handed each a generous portion of roasted venison and fresh bread. "There's plenty more," she assured them warmly, "and apple pie for after." Nearby, Widow Thompson dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief as Madeline brought her a heaping plate and sat beside her for a moment. Jaden watched from across the yard, his heart full to bursting. Henry sidled up beside him, still holding his fiddle. "She's something special," the scout remarked quietly. "That she is," Jaden agreed, his voice rough with emotion. When Madeline passed near him again, he caught her hand and drew her close. "You've already turned my lonely shack into a home," he whispered against her hair. "Just by being you." Her laugh, clear as a mountain stream, carried through the crowd. The sound drew smiles from even the most hardened townsfolk. As the first stars began to glimmer in the darkening sky, Jaden helped Madeline into their wagon. The mule's hooves kicked up soft puffs of dust as they made their way home. Around a bend in the trail, their cabin came into view. A lamp burned in the window, its warm light spilling onto the porch like a welcome. Inside, they knelt together beside the bed. Madeline's hand found Jaden's as they bowed their heads in prayer, asking for strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead, for grace to love well, and for mercy to fill their days. The fire crackled low in the hearth as they sat together, fingers still intertwined. They had weathered mockery and injustice, finding in each other the courage to stand firm. Now, in the quiet of their first night as husband and wife, they knew that faith and love had carried them through to victory. Golden autumn sunlight painted long shadows across the cabin yard as September drew to a close. The mountain air carried the sweet scent of ripening apples and wood smoke. 6 weeks had passed since the wedding, and the rhythm of daily life had settled over Jaden and Madeline's home like a warm quilt. Jaden worked the land from sunrise to sunset, his broad shoulders bent to the tasks of clearing new garden space and mending fences. The steady ring of his axe echoed through the pines, matching the determined beat of his heart. He found joy in the simple satisfaction of honest work, knowing each improvement made their home more secure. Inside the cabin, Madeline had transformed the sparse interior into a haven of warmth. Dried herbs hung from the rafters, sage, mint, and rosemary she'd planted shortly after the wedding. The herb garden flourished under her careful tending, spreading green and fragrant beneath the kitchen window. Her flock of chickens grew fat and content, providing fresh eggs that she often shared with visitors. More neighbors stopped by these days, their wariness replaced by genuine friendship. Mrs. Thompson came twice weekly for coffee and conversation, while young Samuel Peters sought Jaden's advice about breaking his new colt. Even the Cooper children, once shy and distant, now raced up the path on Saturday afternoons, drawn by the promise of Madeline's fresh-baked apple pies and her gentle way with stories. One crisp afternoon, as the sun began its slow descent behind the mountains, Jaden and Madeline sat together on their porch. The rough-hewn boards beneath their feet had been swept clean, and the posts wore fresh whitewash. A parade of wagons passed on the road below, heading toward town for the harvest festival. Jaden wrapped his arm around Madeline's shoulders, marveling at how one moment of courage had altered both their lives forever. "That silver dollar," he mused, his voice soft with wonder. "Best trade I ever made." Madeline nestled closer, her hand finding his. The cruel words that once cut so deep, "fat pig," they'd called her, had lost their power. Here, in the circle of Jaden's love and respect, she had bloomed like her garden herbs, growing strong and sure in her worth. "I never feel those old hurts anymore," she whispered, her eyes bright with contentment. "All I feel is beloved." The sun dipped lower, setting the clouds ablaze with pink and gold. A cool breeze stirred the pines, carrying the distant sound of wagon wheels and children's laughter. One by one, stars began to appear in the deepening blue above. Jaden stood, offering Madeline his hand. Together, they walked toward their cabin, where lamplight spilled from the window in a welcoming glow. The path beneath their feet was smooth now, worn by shared footsteps and daily purpose. Inside, the kettle sang on the stove, and fresh-baked bread filled the air with its homely perfume. Their love had done more than survive ridicule and injustice. It had transformed a lonely mountain shack into a beacon of hope. Here on the frontier, where life often proved harsh and unforgiving, they had built something precious, a home where dignity flourished and love triumphed, its warm light reaching out to welcome others seeking the same grace they had found in each other. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.